Before we get started, of course, don't forget to get subscribed for more content like this, and without further ado, let's discuss my top 8 games of the 2010s that define my playtime on the sticks. Careful ahead for story spoilers. I will mention one game I'll be talking about before I dive into anything that may spoil the game, even if it's past the statute of limitations for that. I also have timestamps in the description, so you can jump around if you're trying to avoid them or something. Starting our list at number 8 is MLB The Show. Now, let's be real, baseball is probably my favorite sport. Seeing the Cubs win the World Series was one of my favorite moments in my young life, which brought so much joy to myself. And as a kid, I had incredible potential, but I got started incredibly late to playing the game and really had developed poor habits in backyard baseball that I could just never shake. I showed incredible power as a kid, but I struck out a lot. I had one of the best gloves on any team I was a part of, but I couldn't throw worth a damn. Luckily, MLB The Show existed, and I could take what was good about myself, throw that in there, and just the poor play I had in other areas. But seriously, it allowed me to fully indulge myself into the world of baseball, from managing a club to being able to say I played every 162 games multiple times throughout the decade. I live for simulation sports games, baby. While the MLB The Show series didn't get its start in this decade, it found its footing thanks to the 7th and 8th generation of consoles. Adding online franchise mode was a huge aspect to many players' game, and while I myself didn't partake in it, its removal has angered fans to this day as they beg for it to return. On the flip side, the show has what I will go down fighting saying, the best card collecting mode in all sports games. Whether it's Madden, NHL, or 2K we're talking about, those games have a very deep card collecting mode in the form of Ultimate Team and My Team respectively, but they are incredibly daunting and almost too in-depth with multiple forms of currencies and contracts required to keep players playing, amongst other things. The show makes it simple, while adding vast depth to keep you playing all year long, from the countless missions to the newly added moments this year that take a page out of the WWE 2K series by having you recreate specific plays intertwined with footage from the actual event. The show adds new ways every year to make Diamond Dynasty a great mode to keep coming back to, and the possibility of being able to do wellness mode without having to spend actual money is great. It'll be a grind, but it is a fun one. And while the show has been a PlayStation exclusive for its entire run, in 2021 we are going to be seeing a version come to the Xbox Series X, which is a terrible name by the way, a little too Wii U-like, but I digress, and the Nintendo Switch. Not since the 2K series have we seen a console-exclusive sports series make the multi-platform jump, the way the 2K series on the Dreamcast spun off to the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2 back in 2002. The time sink the show has been for me over the past decade is only rivaled by one game, but we'll get to that later. If you're a baseball fan, you would have owed it to yourself for picking up a PlayStation platform to play it, but now you'll be able to get away with keeping your other system instead. Number 7, Gears of War 3, Brothers to the End. That Xbox 360 Special Edition console, everything about the marketing leading up to this game's release was monumental for me. At the start of the 7th generation, I was an Xbox guy. In fact, since the Dreamcast's demise, the Xbox platform has pretty much been my main platform. Most of my friends were on Xbox Live, so that's what I naturally went to. The PS3 was always somewhat of an ancillary console for me, and the Wii was something that didn't really interest me growing up due to its motion controls. One reason why Xbox was at the forefront for me? Gears of War. Talk about a bro game. Ask anyone that knows how I play video games and they'll say that Party Ball is awful at shooters. I do pretty damn good against the AI, but put me in an online match and I typically get destroyed more often than not. Despite that, Gears of War 3 brought the awesome ability to play a game that my friends loved with me over the internet. When Gears 3 came out, I came home from college for the midnight release to go with a couple of my friends to GameStop to get this special edition console. It was a beaut, and at the time 360s didn't come with 2 controllers, so this was an awesome addition to have at school. The game was at the time capping off the story of Gears of War. It was a story that wasn't necessarily groundbreaking by any means, but whenever John DiMaggio's involved in a voice role, it's typically bonkers, and in a good way. DiMaggio, most known for voicing Bender over on Futurama, voices the main character Marcus Phoenix. At this point in the series, the war with the Locust has been going on for quite some time, and your best pal, Dom Santiago, has had quite the journey alongside you. Brothers to the End and the campaign tease that we were probably going to see heartbreak in this final game of the trilogy, and if you still haven't played through the series and plan to, I guess I'll hold off on spoiling this one, but damn it, bring some tissues. Gears 3 holds a special place in my heart for the campaign experience spread across 3 games and the countless hours of online multiplayer with my best friends. I'm glad we're in 2019 and still discussing the current state of Gears, but it was at its apex for me back in 2011. Number 6, Spider-Man. Spider-Man has long been my favorite Marvel hero, and for the longest point in my life, he was my all-time favorite hero. I would say since then I've grown quite fond of the Green Arrow and Superman, but Spider-Man is forever filled with amazing stories that are timeless classics. Spider-Man on the PS4 is without a doubt the best superhero game we've had since, well, the only other solo superhero game on this list, but we'll get there. Since we have seen Spider-Man's origin story countless times and know all about it, they did us a favor and just skipped that portion. In this version, we get what could quite literally be the best interpretation of the hero that isn't in written form. I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, is easily my favorite live action version of the web slinger, but I'll be damned if the animated versions of him over the last couple years weren't amazing interpretations, including the two we see in Spider-Verse and the one in this one voiced by Yuri Lowenthal. If we are to be truly honest with ourselves, this is probably the definitive version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. This game is a spiritual successor to DC's biggest video game series of all time, the Batman Arkham series. The gameplay is clearly influenced by the Arkham series, as is the game style. You're in an open world environment with many missions and collectibles to keep you playing long after you finish the main story. The main story doesn't feature the biggest twist if you're familiar with the comics at all, but it provides a fantastic journey getting there. There's also a surprise cameo in there and a great post-credits scene that is actually plot twist worthy. It goes without saying that Insomniac did a fantastic job with this game, but they supported it long after its release with free suits they added to the game. In fact, the only paid content in Spider-Man is the City That Never Sleeps DLC featuring Black Cat. Is it absolute must-play DLC? Not really, but it can be had for pretty cheap nowadays and keeps you playing for longer, so it may be worth it in that respect. When Spidey 2 eventually gets made, and most likely for the PlayStation 5, it's going to be an absolute banger, and I can't wait for the follow-up. If you haven't played this yet, you really do owe it to yourself to pick up a PlayStation to play it. Number 5, The Last of Us. Talk about a game that wasn't designed for someone like me. I'll be quick to admit that zombies and stealth games just aren't typically my cup of tea, and while I do like Metal Gear and of course that little game about a goose, and by the way, if you haven't checked out my review on the Untitled Goose game, I'll link that in the top right corner since it is making its way to other consoles this week. Back on topic, The Last of Us' story is far more than just zombies and being stealthy. Troy Baker, a longtime resident of the video game voiceover business, absolutely kills it as Joel, a man who loses his daughter in the first few minutes of the game. It's quite the rough way to start off your journey. From the get-go, you have the sense of dread of the oncoming apocalypse. Eventually, you are charged with smuggling Ellie. Ellie eventually becomes Joel's surrogate daughter in a way, and while it's a rough road getting there, and while that particular road is filled with a little bit of dishonesty, it's clear that their journey together is quite the exhilarating one. I remember around this game's release that people thought a sequel wouldn't happen, and I thought that was just such a weird notion considering the way this game ends. It leaves an ending that needed resolution. I'm glad we'll be getting one come May of 2020. Still upset at the game's delay, but I always favor delay to fixing the quality instead of a rushed product. Anyway, back to the game at hand. Naughty Dog, developer of Last of Us and the Uncharted series, is quite known for its story-driven, movie-like video games. Found themselves with yet another great game, The Last of Us, that made people want to purchase a PS3 at the end of its lifespan. That's how good this game was. And to prove it, here's my absolute favorite scene from that game.
What the? You wait here. Now, the girl. Is she alive?
What girl? I don't know no girl.
Focus right here, right here. I'll pop your goddamn knee off. The girl.
She's alive. She's David's newest pet.
Where?
In the town. In the town.
Now you're gonna mark it on the map. And it better be the same exact spot your buddy points to. Mark it.
It's right there. You can verify it. Go ask him. Go on. I tell you, I ain't lying. I ain't.
Fuck you, man. I told you what you wanted. I ain't telling you shit.
That's all right. I believe it.
No, wait!
Number 4, Injustice. I'm not good at fighting games, well, until I played Injustice 2, but let's back up a little bit. This isn't the other superhero game I was talking about during the Spider-Man portion, but it's just as important, if not more important than that elusive game I've yet to talk about. Injustice is essentially a modern-day Elseworld story within the DC universe. Those unfamiliar with comics, DC Comics does spin-off stories set outside of its main continuity known as Elseworlds. Most notably known are probably the Kingdom Come and Superman Red Sun stories, and these are ways to tell stories about the heroes we are familiar with, just in a different sense that doesn't affect the weekly storytelling of these characters. Injustice came out in 2013 during the very end of the 7th generation of consoles and was immediately received with high praise. Not only for its combat, and well, speaking of that, it had a good start considering it came from the team responsible for Mortal Kombat, quite possibly the most successful fighting game franchise in video game history. The premise of Injustice is what would happen to the world if Superman finally snapped. Injustice starts immediately with telling you that Joker exposed Superman to kryptonite-laced scarecrow fear toxin that caused Superman to see his pregnant wife Lois Lane as not Lois, but instead his enemy Doomsday. Simultaneously, a bomb was set to blow up Metropolis, and because Superman ain't got no time for that, he flew who he thought was Doomsday up to space to get rid of him, but found out after Batman finally got a hold of him that he wasn't carrying Doomsday, but his pregnant wife. Upon return to Earth, Superman went forearm deep into Joker's chest, killing him. This sets the story premise for Injustice as Superman tries to rid the world of all death and goes to extreme lengths to end wars and will take down anyone who stands opposed. This game is important to me because the story it brought was so damn incredible and got me to be a fan of fighting games. And it introduced one of the best comic stories in the last decade. The actual comic inspired by the game are fantastic reads and gives you great additional insight of the game's story. 2 years ago, Injustice 2 took everything great about the first game and literally made it perfect, including the best representation on screen of Green Arrow and Black Canary. I love the show Arrow and it is very important to me, but holy shit, the showrunners destroyed the Green Arrow Black Canary relationship and replaced it with a god-awful one. But Injustice does not do that. In fact, they do the Green Arrow Black Canary story justice.
He will soon make his presence known, but for now...
First, a few words from the brave and the bold.
I'm the brave one, right?
I'm not bold enough to disagree.
Number 3, Batman Arkham City. I introduced to you the greatest superhero game of all time. Sequels in cinema typically don't always fare that well. People will often say that it wasn't as good as the original, but almost the opposite can be said for video games. Many games work off a formula, and it takes time to perfect that formula. Batman Arkham City is no different. Arkham Asylum, which was the predecessor to City, kept you locked up in the titular asylum essentially, but City gave you free roam of the world of Batman. And speaking of the world of Batman, they even brought in the animated series voice veterans in Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill to reprise their roles as Batman and Joker respectively. Rocksteady and WB pegged the best version of the Caped Crusader and the Clown Prince of Crime for the series, and it added to the amazingness that was the Arkham series. The story told within City and well with the rest of the series was A1, and it provided a combat style that would be influential in games to come, such as the aforementioned Spider-Man series and the Middle-earth Shadow games based in the Lord of the Rings mythos. When future superhero games come out, Arkham is usually the bar that has been set. Arkham City was the one that truly raised the bar even higher from Asylum. City brought in a better graphical style, much more fluid combat, and a rogue of amazing Batman characters to play with to keep you enthralled. Not to mention one of my favorite bands, Coheed and Cambria, created a song specifically for Arkham City that's worth checking out, known as Deranged. It describes the Batman-Joker relationship the best it's ever been told in a song, and rocks out in the meantime. You don't even have to be a fan of Batman to enjoy this game, it's that good. I'd highly recommend jumping into Arkham Asylum first, but do yourself a service and play this game. Number 2, Rock Band. I've always viewed Rock Band as a live service game, and I'm glad they have somewhat lead into as such, 4 years after its last release. Sports games could take a hint from the rhythm game genre. Anyway, Rock Band, much like Gears of War, provided an amazing way to play a game with friends. None of us had time to really get good at instruments to play the songs we emulated within the confines of a Rock Band game, but ironically, we got pretty damn good at playing with plastic instruments. For me in particular, it's the game I go to when I just want to lose myself and pretend I'm on stage while playing some of my favorite songs. On this list, this is probably the most personal to me and may not be easy to share my love of this franchise with the majority of people that may be watching this video, but no game has taken more of my time than the Rock Band series. And while technically the first 2 games came out in the last decade, it's been Rock Band 3 and 4 that have taken all my time compared to the first 2. And honestly, I don't have a whole lot to say, and that may seem weird for it being my number 2 game, but Rock Band is quite the simple game to discuss. You play songs with plastic instruments and that's essentially it. You either dig that idea or you don't, but for me, I dig it and have been for the last 12 years and will continue to do so into the new decade. Long live rock and roll. And number 1, Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 is one of the very first new games I brought to college with me. I'd first heard of Mass Effect thanks to Steven Larson here on YouTube, and back at the time, they were 2 guys who worked for Machinima doing top 10 lists known as 10 for the Win. Nowadays, they work on a wrestling-related podcast known as Going In Raw, so definitely go check that out. Back at the time, they frequently mentioned Mass Effect to a point that I just knew I had to try it. It timed perfectly because a lot of used games I bought had Mass Effect 2 in it. I didn't have access to the first game at the time, so I jumped in. Little did I know I was about to play my favorite video game series for the first time. Mass Effect 2 is yet another game sequel that took everything about the first game and made it a zillion times better. Mass Effect 1 from a story standpoint is an amazing game, but I'll be damned if I enjoyed playing it 50% of the time. Unfortunately, the first game is quite a chore to get through and is mentally, emotionally, and physically draining. The combat is really clunky, and if we are being honest, the game from a graphical standpoint hasn't aged all that well. But Mass Effect 2 does. In fact, Mass Effect 2 took everything wrong with the combat of the first one and made it so much better. Also, the design of the characters, the Normandy, and the universe at large was so much better. The Citadel was beautiful, and it only gets more beautiful with the third game too. Never have I been so emotionally attached to a group of characters as I was with this game. The game's suicide mission and build up to it is such an incredible journey. It features the best DLC ever in a game in the form of Lara the Shadow Broker, and it allows you to continue to create your Shepard to your own liking. Throughout the Mass Effect games, you have the option to be a stand-up hero or an absolute bastard to everyone. And since Mass Effect 2 starts with your character's death and being rebuilt with cybernetics, if you are that bastard, your scars begin to show, giving you an additional sinister look to your bad boy attitude. Or bad girl, FemShep represent. Needless to say, Mass Effect continues the amazing journey from the first game and continues to create my favorite story in video games ever. The depth to all the characters, its presentation, the choices you can make, the combat, and the amazing voice acting including stars such as Keith David, Jennifer Hale, Seth Green, Yvonne Strahovski, and Martin Sheen makes Mass Effect truly feel like a cinematic experience and one that is worth revisiting time and time over again.